Chaos is the name Greek mythology gave to the world before the world, the place and time before definitions, before understanding, before borders and boundaries around what we believe to be. And as the universe came to be, chaos shifted, mutated. It became everything that exists outside the bounds of the laws and systems that make up our order, everything aberrant and unknown. Chaos is formless. Chaos is indescribable. Chaos is what exists beyond our comprehension. Words that existed before words, thoughts before thoughts, and everything before humanity. So it's pretty funny when a guy says he's gonna kill it. Jack fucking Chaos. He works hard, he plays hard, he's always there for his squad when they need him. And he's here to kill the abstract concept of evil, manifested into a single entity as a philosophical argument towards the idea that evil is an act done by people and not an abstract force that can never be defeated. He is a man who truly believes, philosophically, that not only can you punch evil in the face, but that you have a moral obligation to. And I love him. Ever since that first trailer, easily the highlight of that particular E3 show. Not that would be difficult. I've been obsessed with Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin. This weird, brazen game that flies in the face of every sense of decorum games have, freely embracing a grungy 2000s edge that pretty much everyone collectively agreed was beneath them years ago. Fucking slaps. Despite having mechanics that are pretty contemporary, with a bad loot system and combat that bears a lot of surface level similarities to the most influential game of modern times, Salt and Sanctuary, aesthetically, tonally, spiritually, Stranger of Paradise's soul belongs to the PlayStation 2, and to an era of gaming I have a lot of affection for, the age of Edge. The time when upbeat, normal characters were suddenly getting dark and violent makeovers for their sequels, where adolescent angst was king, and all the brooding, cool guys got their own spin-off entries. Edgy games were always a thing, of course, through the 90s and into the 2000s and 2010s, but I'm talking about that specific era. That flavour of Edge, one that marries the kind of nascent emo pop punk culture with a sense of genuine earnestness and unearned confidence in the coolness of what it's doing. It's hard to fully describe, but you know it when you see it, I think, and I definitely know and see it in Stranger of Paradise. What was a relatively somber D&D inspired adventure on the NES becomes an epic, ultra-violent rampage of revenge and hatred where you play the villain. Jack Chaos tears apart cactuars with his bare hands and doesn't give a fuck. And it rules. I love it. A lot of people don't really enjoy this aesthetic, and admittedly, I can see why. When you describe a game as edgy, you could be meaning anything from the use of the mildest swear word possible to smarmy, intolerable, smug games with spines made of toilet paper, to actual bigotry and hatred that is just always off-putting no matter what. These games are edgy, derogatory. They aren't the kind of edgy games I want to talk about today. The games that I love. The games that are edgy, complimentary. I love games that wear their heart on their sleeve. Games without an ounce of cynicism in their bones. Games that do what they do because they just earnestly think it's cool. Games that tap into the undeniably childlike desire to act out, play music just loud enough that it'll annoy your parents, and start the work towards discovering who you really are in the chaos that is adolescence. These games, as ridiculous as they may seem, really do mean an awful lot to me. They're funny, dumb, but genuine and heartwarming at the same time they can be cynical and mean. None of them are perfect, but I think they're important, and oftentimes better than history necessarily gives them credit for. And what better way to demonstrate that than with Jack Chaos's namesake? Jak and Daxter the Precursor Legacy is a pretty fun game. Despite not really gelling with the kind of rareware platformer it's riffing on, I'm able to get a fair amount out of it. It plays really well, with a fantastic moveset for its central character that makes moving through its interconnected, loading screenless world a joy. It is also a pretty anonymous game that slides out of my memory when I'm not playing it. It's fun, but it doesn't really feel like it has a unique identity of its own. Nothing that can allow it to stand up and say, "This is why you should care about me." And evidently, noted bad company Naughty Dog agreed, because the very next game is about as dramatic a shift in tone, setting, and concept as you could possibly imagine. Jak 2 Renegade, because dropping the goofy sidekick from the title is how you let everyone know you're serious now, still has the same basic controls as the prior game, but everything else is different. Instead of running around collecting orbs in a fantasy world, now you're shooting up the cops and escaping on a speeder bike, running GTA-style jobs for local crime lords and terrorist cells as part of your quest to get revenge on a stand-in for George Bush after he tortured you for 2 years to try to make you the ultimate weapon in the war on terror. Also, collecting orbs, but not as much this time. This is a pretty divisive shift, to say the least. A lot of people who really like that first game really hate the sequels for being so different, and I can understand that. But honestly, I really respect the willingness to just throw out a character and world that the developers didn't feel was working the way they wanted and reinvent it, try to keep pace with the times and the desires of the audience. Are they chasing trends? Sure, but it helps that I think this cyberpunk revenge story about taking down the fascist police state on a hoverboard whilst doing Tony Hawk tricks is a pretty cool trend to chase. We all have our different tastes for what we think is cool, and this is pretty cool in my book. I also think the game just works. They didn't throw out Jak's moveset or the platforming. In fact, there's a real wealth of platforming content here that kind of belies the game's reputation as a shooter, arguably as much or even more than the Precursor Legacy, which placed a greater emphasis on miniature tasks. The guns themselves gel shockingly well with the core gameplay, synthesizing with Jak's moveset in surprising ways, like this jumping spin shot, and it incentivizes making use of the full scope of all your moves in combat situations. The vehicles are pretty simple, but the height change thing is really fun. And of course, you have Dark Jak mode. I fucking love Dark Jak. I love it when a guy gets a dark mode. Every game should have a dark mode. The implementation here is pretty strict, thanks to how long it takes to get it back after you spend it, but it does mean you really appreciate that carnage when it happens. Dark Jak really taps into the desire we all have as a child, to jump up into the air and slam our hand down on the ground and cause a giant shockwave that destroys all the cops around us. That's a universal desire right there. The thing I really love about Jak 2 is the setting. While the setting of the first game felt kind of anonymous, there's a real sense that Haven City is built on top of a millennia of real history. It's a cyberpunk city, but it's a pretty varied one, with different slums, docks, highways, and districts that have a real colour and life to them. Areas that clearly demonstrate distinct aesthetics, cultures, and social strata. Precursor orbs, which were the basic coin equivalent collectible before, are now rare and scarce, and are used to activate cheats and other non-diegetic options, which gives them a kind of quasi-mystical quality of being able to affect the reality of the world. And the bits of the game where you venture into areas where nature still has a hold are actually genuinely moving. The lush greenery standing out so much more, knowing that it has become scarce in this world. It's one of the first game worlds that I can remember making a really big impact on me, much like the rest of the game did. I liked Jak and Daxter just fine as a kid, but I loved Jak 2 because it felt like it was playing to emotions that I actually felt. Desire to be cool, act out, rebel in a very childish sense of the word. While the Precursor Legacy felt like something made by people who only thought they knew what kids wanted. Something I've noticed as time passes is that a lot of the people around me have very strict, very concerned ideas about what media is good or appropriate for kids. And I think those are worthy conversations to have, but I think a lot of those people forget what they were like as kids. Kids don't just want to play Kirby all the time, and it's naive to think otherwise. A lot of them want to play Call of Duty and San Andreas and Fortnite. In fact, this was something that Naughty Dog specifically encountered themselves when conducting interviews in preparation for Jak 2. A lot of kids want to engage with grown-up stuff. They want to push back against the boundaries of the box that grown-ups put them in, because they outgrow it far faster than adults ever give them credit for. And I think works that facilitate this desire, that tap into the urge to transgress in environments made to zero in on these impulses, whilst creating it just enough to ensure that kids don't encounter stuff that may be genuinely harmful to them, perform an important socially positive function for young people. In that sense, Jak 2 being an extreme sports GTA for kids is more interesting than it being another collectathon 3D platformer. There's already a lot of those, but there really aren't a lot of cyberpunk open world GTA games with skateboarding and platforming elements for kids, and I appreciate it all the more for its singularity. Even Jak 2's own sequel kind of veers off in its own YA novel Mad Max direction, with an apocalyptic war setting that is actually pretty cool in its own right, but not really as unique as Jak 2. That's a story for another time. For now, let us rest easy knowing that the legacy of edgelord protagonists called Jak is safe and sound. Now, what about the chaos part of the equation? The compilation of Final Fantasy VII is such a weird cultural artifact, and I have a lot of misplaced affection for it. Okay, maybe almost all of it was bad. Sure, it struggles to engage with Final Fantasy VII as it actually existed, and is more fixated on the FF7 that only exists in the cultural imaginary, but on the other hand, it also gave us this entire, lavishly produced spin-off game, the Melolink OVA to FF7's Bottom's main course, starring a completely optional party member who barely had any dialogue, just because he looked so fucking cool. So, fuck it. Call me a compilation liker, with like a million asterisks attached. On the surface, Dirge of Cerberus has everything you'd want from an edgy 2000s game. Vincent is legitimately one of the coolest looking guys in all of video games, and I refuse to accept any accusations to the contrary. The cast is dotted with some other delightful edgelords. You can turn into this sick as hell werewolf guy, which I would count as a Dark Vincent mode, if not for the even cooler one later in the game. The interface is filled with these goth jewelry flourishes, but I don't know. I just can't quite bring myself to love this game like I really want to. It's a shame because this game should be absolutely made for me. I love Final Fantasy, I love this dumb direct-DVD aesthetic mini-franchise, I love Vincent Valentine who sleeps in a coffin despite not actually being a vampire because he's just that committed to the bit, and I love every single thing about this aesthetic, but I don't know, it just doesn't come together in the way I'd like it to. That's not to say it's bad, really. Despite being this legendarily mimetic disaster, the game is a surprisingly well put together third-person shooter. It's no Resident Evil 4, sure, but then you can level that particular criticism at almost every game ever made. So I'm not too down on this game from a time where people are still working out how to make this kind of game, being a little bit rough around the edges. It's way less boring than fellow compilation member Crisis Core, and everyone loves that one. I especially like the weapon customization, which lets you throw together these delightfully over-designed gun-grave ass firearms. Outfitting Vincent between missions has the same feelings and aesthetic results as me going full goth for a night out. I love it. Now, the real issue with Dirge is that, for a game with the reputation it has, I was expecting it to be a lot dumber? There are some real flashes of idiot brilliance, particularly whenever Vice the Immaculate or Rosso the Crimson are on screen, but most of the game is this surprisingly sedate and, dare I say, even boring trudge through grey corridors and grey wastelands alongside Reeve Tuesti, the worst Final Fantasy VII character whom all my homies do in fact hate. The soundtrack on its own is pretty great. Masashi Hamauzu is one of my favourite game composers and turns in really good work here, but it's a shockingly po-faced turn for a game like Dirge of Cerberus. Hamauzu is bringing out his full-string quartet to open for Slipknot, and despite how sick that sounds, it doesn't quite gel. Dirge feels caught between the emo pop rock album parts of it so desperately want to be, and weary concessions to the kinds of games the next generation was threatening us with. The seeds that would sprout into quantum theory and mindjack are depressingly present here. There is stuff in the narrative I enjoy here. Vincent pining over his lost love, whose own feelings towards him are delightfully ambiguous, encased in crystal, is evocative emo diary stuff about your crush who you idolize from a distance, but never really interact with as a human being, doing both of you a massive disservice. There are genuinely sick moments of cutscene direction, such as Vincent surfing on a jetboard, which is definitely one of the best things in video games, but there's just too many boring, slow-paced talking scenes, and the choices made with the character of Shulk are bad. To put it succinctly, this game needed to be way less Death Note OP1 and way more Death Note OP2. However, let that not be said that all this means that Dirge of Cerberus isn't worth playing, because if you can reach the final stretch of the title, you are rewarded with what I was craving all this time. A festival of some of the stupidest, most ridiculous but sickest shit we've ever seen. Azul the Blue gets impaled in his own minigun. Knife fight with Red the Crimson. Oh shit! White the White was dead the whole time, and his boyfriend brother Nero the Sable is pissed. No, wait! He's been possessed by Professor Hojo, who uploaded his brain to the internet. He's been lurking on LiveJournal this whole time. He's going to destroy the world with the power of posting. No, wait! The power of Fujoshi has. The power of Fujoshi has purged Hojo, and now White the White is escaping to the one place that isn't corrupted by capitalism. And so, Vincent must turn in to chaos, the one and true Dark Vincent mode. Plug in his MP3 player and save the world to the sick tunes of an alleged sex offender. This right here, I think we can all agree, this is Le Cinema Kino. Best of the compilation, no doubt in my mind. Even Square Enix themselves agree. You know who's back for a remake? Nero the Sable, White the White. You know who's not back? Angeal. I rest my case. There's definitely things that hold Dirge of Cerberus back from being something I can wholeheartedly love, but overall, I still kinda dig it. It does kinda suck, but it sucks in ways that are ultimately kind of harmless. It's a ridiculous spin-off at the end of the timeline where nothing in it really affects anything else in FF7. Getting mad at it seems about as worthwhile as getting mad at Final Fantasy Legend of the Crystals for ruining the end of FF5. It doesn't desecrate any canon. The fraught parts of the story are things I'm able to compartmentalize, so I think we can all chill out and just enjoy the good parts of Dirge for what they are. Which is more than I can say for some games. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time was a critical darling of a game, one of the real standout stars of the PS2's library, a game that people couldn't say enough nice things about, a game that did a huge amount to define the way a grounded character would navigate a treacherous 3D space, with a central rewind mechanic that, to this day, is pure genius. It's a game with a legacy that speaks for itself, one that stands proud alongside the classics of its generation. They even made a shit movie out of it, which, if the modern game industry has taught me anything, is the goal that every AAA release aspires to. The Sands of Time could rest easy knowing that it was, in every sense of the word, a success. Except financially, apparently. And so, since in a capitalist system that's the only metric that truly matters, some changes were clearly in order for the sequel. Just some small ones. We don't want to alienate people after all.
You bitch!
Yeah, so this is certainly one of the more dramatic examples of edgification we've come across, and certainly the game we've discussed that veers closest to edgy derogatory. In the aftermath of the original game, the eponymous prince is being chased by a demonic creature. Because of the whole fucking around with the timeline and escaping his destined fate thing, and must explore a distant island in 2 different time periods to try to find a way to escape the beast that hunts him. It's honestly a pretty cool premise. A few people who worked on Sands of Time had criticisms of that game, namely that the prince didn't suffer any consequences for what happened in that game. And when those people were put in creative positions for the sequel, used that opportunity to explore what those consequences would look like. That's cool. I like it. The darker tone also works well with the moderately improved combat, which is one of the things that pretty much everybody disliked about that first game. Sands of Time's combat felt very utilitarian, which was fitting for a prince that clearly wasn't as much of a warrior as he liked to think he was. It pushed you towards finding a strategy that worked and then simply repeating that. Warrior Within is scrappier, much more about finding and using weapons at a feverish pace. It's still not great combat, but it works really well with what the game is trying to do. Unfortunately, working well is something I kinda have to stop applying to Warrior Within at this point. The game is really buggy in a way that's kinda shocking for a game of this type from this time. It's got an incredible metal soundtrack, but you'd be hard pressed to hear it because it bugs out constantly. Platforming is buggy, combat is buggy, the graphics are buggy. It almost gives the game a similar kind of feverish energy to its central character, but ultimately the way it grinds the experience to a halt more often than not leads me astray from that read. Plus, there's a bigger problem. The thing that prevents this game's edge from being read as wholly endearing. This game is just awful about women. There's no 2 ways about it. There's only like 3 characters in the game who are actual characters, and 2 of them are women that are hilariously objectified sexist caricatures that the camera never stops being absurdly leering towards. And it's really hard to enjoy this edgelord take on the Prince of Persia when it stops being an endearing, over-the-top affectation and he just becomes a straightforward misogynist. It's the thing that makes Warrior Within hard to go back to. And it's just kind of anathema to why I like this whole milieu. While there are concerns I would raise at the sheer ubiquitousness and fetishization of guns in these games, generally speaking, I find them much more harmless in what they say than a lot of the more serious, well-regarded games of modern times. The same can't be said here. It's just misogynistic and leering and gross in a way I can't really abide. I have memories of when I was a kid, of giggling with friends when the prince said bitch at the start of the game, and I think they could have written this game in such a way that we could enjoy the transgression of saying bad words without making it actively hateful towards women. Having said all that, I think Warrior Within's sequel, The Two Thrones, is something I can love much more easily. It's still got some definite classic video game male-gazing, but the game is a genuine response to and development on the themes of its predecessor, and I really respect it actually trying to work with what it's done in the past. Externalizing the prince from Warrior Within as a separate individual inside the prince from Sands of Time, a dark prince, if you will, and essentially making most of the game into a two-hander conversation between the two is a genuinely fascinating turn. One that uses the foibles of the franchise to reflect on what it means to come to terms with the divided parts of ourselves, to face the parts that make us want to grimace or cringe. I really like the Sands of Time, and I enjoy Warrior Within sometimes, but Two Thrones is really the one that stood the test of time the best for me. It's a game that, as silly as it might seem, feels like it's talking about some real shit at times, and it's great, honestly. It's a genuinely redemptive game for the trilogy, one that lets the ugliness of Warrior Within sit with me a little better, and also lets me play with this fucking sick Dark Prince with a chain whip like Ivy from Soul Calibur. Dark mode guys are just great, put them in every game. Dark Nathan Drake, Dark Kamui Uehara, Dark Animal Crossing Villager, Dark Sin City, the sky's the limit. While I do have a genuine appreciation for the aesthetic we're discussing here, and will defend its artistic value, it would be remiss of me to pretend that all of these games were equally earnest and devoid of cynicism, because a lot of these games were pretty nakedly cynical marketing moves. And Warrior Within, on some level, kinda is that. It's not the most cynical game I'm talking about today though. This one stings. I was so excited for GoldenEye Rogue Agent as a kid. 007 Nightfire was a defining split-screen multiplayer experience for me, with endless hours spent riding the cable cars and skyline, pulling off sick shots. And that speaks volumes, because as an Irish queer, I'm basically morally obligated to hate James Bond. Sure, my dad tried to force all those god-awful movies on me, so I ended up with a fairly deep knowledge of the insufferable English prick, whether I liked it or not. But I never thought this asshole was cool, you know? All my heroes had big swords, big hair, and big sad. The one thing I did really latch onto with Bond was the villains and their secret lairs. They were these ridiculous, unreal spaces where reality breaks down and James Bond moves from the relatively grounded world of fast women and hot cars into a totally different one, with its own laws and gravitational forces. If there was anything cool about James Bond, it was the baddies. So imagine my delight when I heard about GoldenEye Rogue Agent, a game where you played a James Bond villain, a game where, in the very first level, you kill James Bond? Hell yes, baby, let's go, let's fucking go, kill James Bond, baby, let's do it, let's finally kill that smug English imperialist prick, kill James Bond, kill the government, kill England, kill the Queen, kill James Bond, kill James Bond! Not quite everything I dreamed of, to be honest. Yeah, so any excitement that this premise has to offer is drained out pretty quickly once it becomes agonizingly clear that this game fucking sucks. It's an inexcusably slow, plodding, miserable FPS with almost non-existent level design that is only moderately enlivened by some contextual hazards and the ability to take human shields. Levels just go on and on and on. There's no variety and almost no set pieces. You just trundle along from bad gunfight to bad gunfight, slowly developing a comprehensive cure to insomnia. It is one of the worst feeling FPS games I've ever played, and there's no excuse for it to be like this. Nightfire played better than this. Halo came out years ago. Shit like this is why I can't be mad at Dirge of Cerberus for being at least competent, because this is how truly awful it could get. The only thing this game has going for it is its premise, and it fucks that up too. Even though you're technically working for a James Bond baddie, you never really feel like a rogue agent. You don't get to fight MI6 or cops ever. Even killing James Bond was a lie. If you manage to force your way through the miserable first level, you're greeted with the revelation that the game is just too cowardly to let you kill the smug cunt, as it's revealed that his death was just a VR simulation. Instead, you're ejected from MI6, becoming a rogue agent, and go to work for Goldfinger from Goldfinger, who, along with the man with the golden gun from The Man with the Golden Gun, gives you a new prosthetic golden eye, not from Goldeneye. That's right, that's the ludicrous contrivance they go to in order to give the game a reason to be called GoldenEye in a desperate attempt to court nostalgia for Rare's N64 game. You're a man with an eye that is gold called Mr. GoldenEye. Bravo. It all just feels so nakedly cynical, on a level that I find honestly kind of rare in games. Even horrible live service monstrosities go to some effort to disguise their bankruptcy. This has zero shame and zero merit. It's just a pathetic attempt to appeal simultaneously to the people still putting GoldenEye on best games ever lists, the people like me who want to play an edgy Bond baddie, and aging dads who get off on references to misogynistic movies from the 60s. Really, all you need to see about this game is this image of Pussy Galore's 60s actress's head horrifyingly Frankenstein onto this extreme sports girl body. It haunts my nightmares. Okay, I think I've done my due diligence in talking about cynical marketing campaigns exploiting this aesthetic. Let's get back to the good shit. Like everyone else born in the mid-90s, I too had a state-mandated Pokemon phase, with the Gen 1 and 2 games being some of the very first video games I ever remember playing. But over time, I kind of fell out of it. I was super excited for Gen 4, but I skipped Gen 5, and when I picked up Pokemon Y in university, I kind of struggled to finish it. Part of this was that I didn't really enjoy the gameplay anymore, but another is that I felt like I had run out of things to discover in the world of Pokemon. When I look back at my time loving the series, it was really the sense of mystery and discovery of the world that hooked me. Sure, the setting was pretty simple, but it had all these gaps and implications that fired the imagination. There's a reason Lavender Town became a kind of cultural meme touchstone for "this kid's thing is super dark actually." And it's because the implications brought out by the game's writing give kids the space to project their own maturing sensibilities into it. Pokemon implied a vast world that existed beyond what you could see, and that's amazing for a kid's imagination. Ridiculous rumours like flying into space to capture Deoxys felt completely plausible, because even more absurd propositions, like being able to capture a glitch Pokemon if you went to a specific place after doing a specific thing, or puzzles based on having specific Pokemon in specific positions in your party, were already a thing. Pokemon relished in letting kids fill in their blanks with their imaginations, both narratively and experientially, and the resulting experience was something that grew beyond their cartridges and spilled out onto playgrounds and sleepovers the world over. For me anyway, the later games just felt like everything had been discovered, done before, and things were just going through the motions. A lot of this is just me growing out of the series, but I do think the more these games explain themselves and create a more mapped out experience, the less mystery they can evoke, and the more they just kind of become standard RPGs. This isn't a knock on the newer games, or even a criticism of them. I'm sure they're great, they just aren't my thing really. You know what is my thing though? This guy! Wes here is the protagonist of Pokemon Colosseum, a sorta sequel to the Pokemon Stadium games on the N64. Except unlike those games, Colosseum has an entire story mode where you play as a former member of Team Snag'em, one of the evil gangs all over the Pokemon games, who's just blown up his former hideout and stole a cyborg arm thing that lets him steal Pokemon, riding away from the explosion on his heavy metal chopper motor unicycle. And if that description alone doesn't get you interested in what this game is throwing down, I don't think we can be friends. It's a game that immediately digs into and brings up to the surface ideas and concepts that floated around the periphery of the Pokemon games, about Team Rocket and cultures of other regions, in a way that is just utterly enthralling. I really like this one. After 3 generations of Pokemon games, set in places that are based on different parts of modern Japan, Colosseum having a more steampunk Wild West feel, with some colourful, eccentric baddies that really remind me of something like Cowboy Bebop or Trigun, speaks to a vision of the world outside of those original regions that is more varied and interesting. Ultimately, a vision that wouldn't actually be borne out by the mainline sequels. The first area you go to in the game is a saloon built inside a derelict train car where illicit Pokeballs are sold under the table, a scene that sticks more in my mind than anything in Pokemon X or Y or any other post-Gen 3 game that I've played. And then there's this guy, this Final Form-ass JRPG Dragon Ball villain looking motherfucker who just kind of appears and gives you a friendly little chat and then just leaves. It rules. It's different but still distinctly Pokemon, and I think that's a tremendous achievement. All of this was enough to get me interested, but it's the fact that Colosseum actually makes some pretty big swings with the base Pokemon formula that got me hooked. All the basic mechanics are here, but a few crucial tweaks have been made to make them more engaging. For starters, every single battle is a double battle, which immediately expands the options of each encounter and gives certain moves much more utility. Then there's Shadow Pokemon. Yes, that's right, even Pokemon games have a Dark Mode. Shadow Pokemon are the only way to increase your stash of funny little guys. You have to steal them from opponents, which immediately adds a whole new level of tension to Pokemon acquiring, because Shadow Pokemon all have a move that damages themselves, meaning that reducing their health is a much riskier prospect all on its own. But if you accidentally KO Pokemon, you might lose out on them altogether until much later in the game. The concept of stealing the Pokemon of others isn't some marketing gimmick just to capitalize on the edge wave, it's a legitimately evocative concept that makes the core gameplay more engaging. Plus, there's a real positivity to it underneath it all. When you capture a Shadow Pokemon, you're taking it from someone that's abusing it, and having them in your party slowly cures them of the Kingdom Hearts Darkness Lurgy. You can even cure them faster by calling out to them in battle, at the cost of a turn and potential attack buff. So there's nuance to it as well, where caring for a Pokemon isn't just about fighting alongside them, but it's about taking care of their emotions. It's nice. There is a genuinely deeply wholesome heart beneath the edgy premise, and it's just adorable. This was definitely the biggest surprise I encountered while making this video, and it's one I want to get back to and play more of. Pokemon Colosseum is the most fun I've had playing a Pokemon game since Emerald when I was a tiny child. It's not just a game where you can have fun with how ridiculous the edge is. It's a game where the edgy premise genuinely improves the experience, without compromising the core of what makes Pokemon fun in the first place. One that makes good on the promise of Pokemon as a concept. And it's not the only example of edge improving something I can think of.
And now, our feature presentation.
Hey, remember the War on Terror? You probably do. I mean, it's still happening, I think. It's hard to tell what is uniquely the War on Terror and what is just the routine enforcement of the hegemon. Or maybe they're one and the same. It's hard to know for sure after I've spent my whole life in it. I was like 6 years old when the War on Terror could appreciably have been said to truly begin, though there's some debate there. I don't have an awful lot of memories from being that young, and I don't have any memories of the things I have seen so many speak about as affecting them. It was kinda just always there, always in the background. I can understand the material effect these images represent, but I wasn't there before they were, and that means I don't have the same emotional reaction to them as others did, even if their emotional reactions, however far they were away from me, did have power over me, especially as a child, as the power of these images built a cage around me that I couldn't see, only feel. But still, I knew how others reacted, and through them I built an understanding of how I was supposed to react. Culture has a consensus, but that consensus isn't universal. It's a hegemon like any other, one where the reactions of the powerful rule the worlds of those who aren't. And so, those people inflict their reactions onto images that I might see very differently. Images like this, and this, and this.
Discovering the secret of my past will be nearly impossible. I'll take those odds.
I Am All of Me is such a banger. I remember recording the audio of this intro directly off my TV onto my dinky dozen megabyte MP3 player because I wanted to listen to it whenever I wanted. Even back then, I knew a stone cold Crush 40 banger when I heard one. Okay, I get it. I understand why the funny hedgehog holding a machine gun is funny. I understand why giving him a chopper motorcycle is hilarious. And while I do think it is funny now, it's more of an understanding on like an intellectual level. Because the sheer visceral reaction to a funny hedgehog have gun now just isn't in me. I don't think it ever was. That cultural consensus had no power in my mind. Look at all the games we've talked about today. This was a hot trend at the time. When Shadow came out, the context I derived from that trend was that a move like Shadow the Hedgehog was normal for Sonic. Expected, even. It wasn't some shark-jumping final insult for a sacred franchise. It was just kind of an exciting next step. A fan-requested next step. So, no. I'm not going to performatively react in horror and revulsion to the fact that a Sonic is holding a gun? I know where it comes from. For people for whom Sonic is a funny animal guy who lives in cartoon world, his showing up in a modern city shooting guns at aliens probably feels about as congruous as Mickey Mouse in a trench coat fighting Bleach villains. Oh wait. Thing is, that's not my Sonic. My Sonic lived in a post-Sonic Adventure 2 world. Government cover-ups, doomsday weapons, and the President of the United States were just fundamentally part and parcel of the setting and the characters. At age 10, City Escape was a far more iconic first level in a Sonic game than Green Hill Zone could ever be. So, when Shadow begins this game by diving into a modern city as it's besieged by aliens, there are no thoughts of this being fundamentally wrong or inherently ridiculous. It's simply the Sonic version of Jak 2, Dirge of Cerberus, Warrior Within. All of this is not to say that Shadow the Hedgehog isn't a ridiculous game that's fun to laugh at. It is, but to point out that we have that reaction to it because of a wider unconscious cultural consensus on what is sensical, what Sonic is supposed to be, written by people who have power, however small it might be, over the minds of others. And I'd like to sidestep that as much as we can. It's easy to laugh at something for not fitting in, but harder to try to look at why it might choose not to fit in. So, let's set aside appeals to viscera and precipitous notions that hedgehogs inherently cannot wield firearms or ride motorbikes, and enter a better world. His world. Wait, that's the wrong song! Shadow the Hedgehog opens with the titular character doing what we were all doing in 2005. Angsting about our dark and tragic past, obscured by the fog of amnesia. Then the aliens show up. The devil offers us a convenient, easy answer to our angst if we gather up some WMDs for him, and off we go. What follows is a discordant, postmodern journey to one of 10 possible endings, where sometimes one level will flow into the next, but more often than not, you'll be dragged from scene to scene with almost no continuity in narrative or difficulty curve. Each level is a vignette, an image from this war between the satanic aliens, the CIA military headed by anime heterochromia Dick Cheney, and the industrialists looking for the angle on either side. And by playing through them and making choices on one of up to 3 directions to go through, you arrange them into something resembling a story, but one that doesn't have a continuous plot, character arcs, any sense of cohesion from one scene to the next. It's Sonic the Hedgehog as processed through flicking through cable news channels in 2003, and it's kinda amazing. The game's structure is completely nonsensical, and would likely cause the mind of any YouTube video essay guy obsessed with the hero's journey to collapse in on itself. But as a reflection of how the media presented the imagery that Shadow is playing in, including the uncomfortably racially charged energy of the language, it's kinda on the money. If you want to talk about how games in the 2000s responded to the War on Terror's media presence, Shadow had better stand proud just beside Killer 7. Also, there's dialogue like this. It rules.
This is like taking candy from a baby, which is fine by me.
How's the actual game, I hear you ask? Shut up! This is the actual game. All of this stuff is the game. But since you asked, it's fine. Shadow the Hedgehog has a reputation for being an unplayable shambles, and I think that's mostly untrue. I think it plays really smoothly in terms of the basic kinesthetics, buoyed by some fantastic animations. Doesn't quite capture the insurmountable rush you get from successfully leashing Sonic speed in SA2, but also it doesn't have mad space, so you know, swings and roundabouts. Movement is smooth and satisfying, and gels surprisingly well with the new gun mechanics, and trust me, I'm as surprised as you are to be saying that, but it's true. Generous lock-on and routinely low enemy counts mean that it can be really fun to speed through an area guns blazing. It's just that the problems come when you have to stop and smell the rainbows. Smell the rainbows? I wrote this here, but that's not an expression. Well, how do you smell a rainbow? Different objectives in the levels leading to different routes through the game, that rules. The part that doesn't rule is that aside from the just reach the end goals, which are usually totally fine and gel with level design, the actual objectives leave a lot to be desired. There are some cool ones, like this one where you have to shoot down Air Force One before it escapes. Any game where you can kill the US president has got to be worthy of recognition, but too many of them just involve you hunting down every single type of enemy in levels really not designed for this type of collect-a-thon gameplay. Sometimes this is manageable and only a little tedious. Other times you're 30 minutes deep into Lost Impact, discovering new depths of tedium for the human body to endure. In a game that looks like this, sounds like this, acts like this, jank and frustration are things I can work with. They can become part of the charm, part of the effect. Boredom is the one thing that a game like Shadow the Hedgehog shouldn't make me feel, and ultimately it courts boredom far more than I would ever like. Still though, it's not like all of this makes it notably worse to play than any other 3D Sonic game. I like Sonic Adventure 2 despite the existence of Security Hall, so why shouldn't I like Shadow the Hedgehog despite the existence of Central City? Why not push through the frictions and frustrations to get to the good stuff? Why not accept these bad level objectives to reach images with the sheer power of this Shadow the Hedgehog running through an alien comet with a machine gun 3 times as big as him that is clipping into the ground at all times, an image that encapsulates how I feel about the entire game. Shadow the Hedgehog feels like it's pushing up against the boundaries of what this kind of game is supposed to be, what a game about a funny animal is supposed to look and play like, what kind of images it's supposed to evoke, standing staunchly defiant against preconceived notions of what this kind of story should be, but still conceiving of its boundary pushing in an endearingly childlike way. I honestly adore it. When you're a kid, you don't have a lot of control over your life. The things you can do are ruled by your parents. Images on TV you don't understand or have any stake in. So many things are simply decided for you. Your name, your look, your gender, your schedule, your school. It's a stifling environment. And it's only once you start pushing back against all this that you start to figure out and decide who you really are. Not all of it will work out and you might make some mistakes along the way, but it's a process you do have to go through, or else you'll never quite escape the identity you were locked into from the start. And Shadow the Hedgehog really does feel like some awkward first steps towards carving out your own identity, especially for someone growing up in the 2000s. Not just in the guns and the cars and the
Damn fourth Chaos Emerald.
but in the choices offered by the game's branching paths, which are more powerful of fantasy than anything fighting aliens could muster. Cutting a path of self-determination through an incomprehensible barrage of disconnected imagery, Shadow the Hedgehog abandons all notions of clear and understandable storytelling to let you carve your own path through it, to reach an ending where Shadow makes a declarative decision about his identity, whether he's a hero, a villain, or a robot. It's a decision he makes for himself, based on the choices made to get there. You decide who you are. In a way, it's kind of a shame that there is a true ending, where if you wait around long enough, you do get a clear answer as to who Shadow is. The sheer rejection of canon and linear storytelling is what makes this game cool, and even resonant. A game where the edgy, dark version of Sonic does things that Sonic would never be allowed to do, on a player-directed journey to decide an identity for himself. It's kind of beautiful, in the way that all of these games are. You can call them cringe if you want, but why? Why cringe? Cringing as a reaction feels like one rooted in secondhand embarrassment, in shame. It's when you look back at something fucking stupid and ignorant you said when you were younger, or at pictures of you dressed in what you thought was acceptable clothing, or when I'm reminded that I existed before the year 2019. But why be ashamed of Shadow the Hedgehog? Why be embarrassed about it? It's a ridiculous game for kids. It doesn't reflect badly on you or anyone else to enjoy something like this. Why are games like this cringe, while games like God of War or GTA, games with far viler worldviews, games with far more stuff to be embarrassed or ashamed about enjoying, are given the treatment of being high art because they look like the movies and TV shows that the world tells you are smart and for adults? No matter what anyone claims, we don't emerge from the womb with a fully formed scientific response to art. Culture is shaped by consensus, and we think that games like GTA 5 have more cultural worth than games like Shadow the Hedgehog on some level, simply because that is what we have agreed on, consciously or unconsciously. But fuck that, man. I'm inspired by these dumb games about adolescent ideas of rebellion. I'm standing up for Shadow and all the other games I've talked about today. They give kids a space to be authentically themselves in an environment designed to facilitate that impulse, with an aesthetic that appeals to them. I think that's important. I think that's necessary. Contrary to the way a lot of pearl-clutching commentators may claim, kids don't want to be squeaky clean all the time. They like feeling older than they are. They like acting out a little. They like something that makes them feel, for once in their life, like they aren't being told what to do, what to say, and what to think, so that they can start the long journey towards being themselves for the first time. And these games give the little edgelords among us the space to do just that, where they can have fun acting out and indulging in illusions of transgression that are just fun, even therapeutic, and playing around in an aesthetic they love, although everyone around them might tell them how cringe and ridiculous and dumb it all is. These games like Stranger of Paradise, Devil May Cry, Burnout 3, Persona 3, they're all just earnestly unapologetic in what they are. They don't put on airs, they don't try to feign an aloof sense of disinterest, they just enjoy what they enjoy and hope that you enjoy it too. And because of that, they're cooler than most games could ever hope to be. In a very real way, these games are kind of the soul of the entire medium for me. Playing Shadow the Hedgehog is the equivalent of putting on that music playlist that's just for you, the one you don't want people in polite company to see. It's belting out a song you know other people think is too silly, too cheesy to take seriously. And if you don't think you can embrace that, if you don't think you can love something that others see as stupid and ridiculous and impossible to find meaning in, I've got news for you. If you have any space for video games inside your heart, you already have.